Good morning. It's right after 6 o'clock a.m. on September 9th, 2021. I am making this video because I would like to present a few recommendations. I'm going to try to be constructive, and I'm going to try to, shall we say, contribute in a meaningful manner to responding to some matters that have been put into the public realm that have been identified as needing attention. I'm on the record of discussing my concern regarding, among other things, a reconciliation bill that was put into effect at the beginning of 2021 that I have already provided commentary on online as well as in writing. And I understand that right now, presumably, there is a budget reconciliation process and or other matters related to an alleged transportation infrastructure bill. However, the matter about which I wish to speak at the moment is in consideration of an announcement that was made yesterday by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen concerning a understanding of the debt ceiling, or rather the debt limit for the United States, and a concern that by October, sometime in October, that the United States will be in a situation of precariousness that may necessitate, as it was identified in the media, as a form of waiving of matters related to the national debt. I'm very concerned about what that implies, specifically because for several years now, I've been attempting to bring attention to illegal tax waiver processes and policies that I contend are materially relevant at this point in time and have not only public health and public safety concerns, but also belie a longer-term process of bad faith on behalf of people identifying themselves as representatives of the people in official government roles. There have been several laws that have been passed in the state of Texas, for instance, concerning some form of tax waiver that are not only unconstitutional by the letter of the law and through their literal expression, but are actually unnecessary. If there were certain laws that were already on the books, including especially concerning existing pension law and understanding awards of benefits to either spouses or family members based upon compliance with existing pension law, then these tax waivers would not be necessary. Not only that, there's another matter specific to the distinction between a state function and the function of other political subdivisions, including counties, but also specifically municipalities. In the state of Texas, for instance, there is a specific municipal sales use tax act that I contend has not been appropriately applied, and in the course of being inappropriately applied, has created perils that have been attempted for offsetting with some kind of alleged tax waiver that is itself a part of a derivative process and does not actually fulfill a literal need, but instead allows for a derivation or a diversion that has not been appropriately accounted for. What does this have to do with federal policy? Well, insofar as the federal debt limit may get to a point where we might have a more comprehensive process associated with waiver, especially if something as monumental as the federal deficit, then I think it behooves those involved to bring more awareness explicitly to what this entails. My understanding is that without a declaration of a formal declaration of a state of war, without a formal declaration of war, that such a waiver process could have very, very substantially hazardous and perilous implications for the American people, and as well, potentially other people around the world that would otherwise be considered allies of the United States or would have considered themselves allies of the United States. And this is part of a long-standing and long-term problem we've been having concerning whatever is allowed to be characterized as COVID-19. In the process of addressing it, primarily in the manners it has been addressed, that have intersected first and foremost through, for instance, the CDC, and or through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. What we've had is an accrual of a significant amount of obligation that has been characterized as some form of debt. And in the course of that debt, the manner in which fiscal policy is being determined, including on the level of the Congress, but also in terms of how states are responding to their local considerations in relationship to a refusal to hold accountable abuse of drawing down on federal resources that were not necessarily needed under the context of the characterization they were sought originally. We're in the situation that a lot of things that otherwise would have been attended to in a better manner have been neglected, if not outright sabotaged. I use the word sabotage very directly because this is absolutely the kind of matter that would need specific attention paid. I have looked through many of the bills that have been passed in the last year under the current administration, Many of those bills are passed with less than one, maybe two votes distinction, 100% along party lines. We are obligating the entire nation, and in many ways, by virtue of our relationship to the rest of the world, including in the manners that COVID 19 has been identified, to other countries and their political and economic destinies moving forward with a very, very, very slim margin and with very, very, very little explication to the American people of what the actual implications of these policies are. It's for that reason that there are a couple of things that need to be addressed directly and materially, and I encourage those that are in a position to actually respond to them authoritatively to do so as soon as possible. First is in consideration of the characterization of the alleged COVID relief. I have received a letter in the mail, presumably from the Department of Treasury, including through the IRS, that is on letterhead identifying itself as coming from the White House. One letter from 2020, penned by Donald Trump, and one letter from the White House identified as part of a 2021 relief disbursement from Joseph Biden. Both of them identify and quantify the specific kind of payment that is being administered in a manner as if it were income. They are not talking about it as a subsidy. It is not formally stated in the actual information as being distributed along with those monies as being a form of relief, as being a recovery, as being an award, for instance, a Social Security award for somebody that's been determined to have a disability, or as a subsidy. It is identified as an economic impact payment. It is a payment. It is specifically characterized as a payment that implies, if not explicitly states, that it is income. I contend it needs to be reflected as income. There was a report that I found yesterday from an agency, nonprofit agency that does a fiscal evaluation, that said that with the first COVID relief, or with the economic impact payment that was distributed as part of the CARES Act of 2020, that the total amounted to around $271 million. Now, I know when I attempted to apply for my taxes, I recorded the original payment of $1,200 as income. That income I invested in my LLC. And when I did my tax returns, going through the process that I was able to go through in terms of what was available based upon my tax status, I would have been eligible for a return. And the option existed for that return to have been provided in the form of a U.S. savings bond. My intention was, and still is, that money that would have been the return, including a return considering activities that I had engaged in with my small business, and as part of the evaluation of my tax, in response to the income that I recorded, I would have been eligible for a return, and I would have put that return into a U.S. savings bond. I contend it makes a very substantial difference if these payments that are being distributed are actually reflected as income, and then depending upon the way that tax policy is identified and rolled out and engaged, that in the course of calculating it as income, it could also potentially be available for a return. And there should be a campaign to encourage, if not some manner in which to either incentivize or even legislate, the return in the form of a savings bond. What would it do materially, practically, literally, to our fiscal status in this country if instead of it being some sort of relief that is just given out without any explicit understanding of what the obligation is in its receipt, that it was allowed to be and required to be identified as income, and then allowed to be identified as taxable income, including potentially available through some sort of tax policy as income that could then be returned in the form of a U.S. savings bond per person. So that while we're going through this crisis as a country, we as the American people are in a position where we're actually investing in its future in the form of a U.S. savings bond. This is a very, very significant difference. And I want to know, honestly, why is nobody in Congress, nobody in the Senate, nobody in Treasury, and even nobody at the Federal Reserve, much less anybody within the private banking sector, approached it from this perspective? See, I already know there are plenty of investment managers that have, right? I already know that many of the big banks and the relief for the assistance they got when it came to small business loans, they've approached it in some manner comparably. Why were the American people not informed of a process whereby we could do the same thing? So we are actually literally investing in whatever this recovery or this response is as people that actually have a stake in our future. opposed to people that are supposed to be dependent on some sort of political gamesmanship to determine when or in what manner they're going to start deploying helicopter money. Because at this point, that's all it seems to be. I contend that that is not responsible, and it is actually not the responsibility of the American people to account for the deficiencies of those that allege they were qualified to be in the role of determining and moving forward on fiscal policy since the acknowledgement of COVID-19, specifically in the manner it was acknowledged. That's the first part. And I contend that that is very substantial and that it needs to be addressed and it needs to be taken into account and presented to us in a meaningful way that we can actually apply in a practical perspective. For the time being, I'm going to just keep this as that initial understanding of what is at stake here and hope that it is taken seriously.